Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, Is Bad Data Killing Your Customer Engagement Strategy? I'm thrilled to have two data management experts here today, Tim Perry, who's the Vice President at AmberLeaf. AmberLeaf is a services partner of ours, and they specialize in implementation. And we also have Adrienne Witten here. She is the Director of Product and Segment Marketing here at Marketo. A few housekeeping items before we get started. This webinar is being recorded. We'll send out the slides and the recording after the webinar concludes. If you're posting to social, please make sure to use our Twitter handle at Marketo. And if you have a question, we will be doing a Q&A at the end, so please type it in the chat box. Take a look at the agenda of what we're going to learn today. We're going to go over why should we care about data quality, how to address it, and who is responsible for the issue, common data pitfalls and quick wins, and finally, what questions you should be asking internally to get started. And with that, I'll hand it over to Adrienne to get us started.
Thanks, Lizzie, and welcome everybody to the webinar. As Lizzie said, I'm on the segment marketing team here at Marketo, and honestly, I have one of the best jobs in the world for a marketer because I get to talk to other marketers every single day about the good, the bad, the exciting. And I think most marketers would agree that today is an amazing time to be a marketer. We have access to better tools and better data about our customers than we've ever had before, but of course it's not without challenges. I personally work on our industry go-to-market strategy here at Marketo, and I know just about every industry is going through some kind of digital transformation. I mean, it's not just the tech industry, but in insurance, healthcare, even manufacturing are having their entire businesses changed by technology and the data that's now available. You know things have really changed when you start talking not just to your TV, but to your refrigerator and your thermostat. I personally am going to draw the line at talking to my light bulbs, I think. But with traffic here in Silicon Valley, I am more than ready for a self-driving car. So speaking of technology, as marketers, we have more ways to touch the customer than we've ever had before and more ways to gather data. Now, I got an Echo not too long ago, and I love it. It feels a little like having a butler, which is kind of neat, only the butler can't bring me anything. But I'm also fully aware that Amazon is tracking every single thing I say to Alexa, and even some things that I wasn't meaning to say to her. I don't know what Amazon's actually doing with that data, but I think we know that there's a growing expectation of a trade-off. So in exchange for giving up some personal information, I expect to get something back for it. And it's not just me. It's actually reflected really clearly in some of the research that Marketo just pulled out of the field this month. So as you can see from the stats here on the left, 73% of the people polled expect you to have a deep understanding of their needs if you expect to engage them. And the middle there, 65% of the people polled said that brands could do a better job of aligning their engagement to their preferences. So that means about what content they want to see, the frequency, channels they want to use, etc. And finally on the right here, 66% expect all of their interactions with a brand to be personalized. I was actually pretty surprised by that one. That they don't want those generic messages. They're telling us loud and clear. So we call this level of expectations about engagement and personalization the engagement economy, because everyone and everything is connected, and people want and expect to be engaged with compelling and personalized content. So back to my comment about the fact that it's a great time to be a marketer, but it's also a time when you're competing with every single other marketer in the world for the attention of your buyer. Consumers are inundated with messages everywhere they look. And the problem is, this is what it feels like to your customers. It feels like a disconnect. We've grown, a lot of us as marketers, we've grown the channels that we communicate on so quickly and largely in siloed ways. So a lot of times you have a siloed team and you have siloed processes and programs, and it feels disjointed to your customers. So it's a combination of these different silos, but bad data is a big part of that too. So at this point, since that's the focus of our webinar here today, I'm going to hand it off to Tim Perry, who's here, as we said, from AmberLeaf, to discuss how bad data problems surface themselves for your customers, how it looks to them, and how it impacts your budget. He's going to explain how your organization can get started down the path of improving your data position. Tim, of course, has spent the last 20 years working with organizations of all sizes, mid-market to Fortune 500, and helping them establish data management architectures that support effective customer engagement strategies. So he's a real expert here, and I'm going to hand it off to him now. Tim?
Terrific. Thanks, Adrian. Yes, as Adrian said, AmberLeaf focuses on eliminating that disconnect within the customer experience, the multiple channels and the multiple silos. So as we transition, I'm going to start off with the focus on data by talking through a couple real-life case studies of where bad data exists and how that is impacting the customer. So this is an example from LL Bean. This is the names and address have been masked here, but this is a real-life example of a customer that now is receiving 4 printed catalogs from LL Bean each quarter. Those are being sent to the same single-family address. Think about the amount of cost and waste that's happening as part of that, and ultimately that is rooted in a bad data issue. As you can see from the picture on the far right, the picture of the cat, one of the names at that address that is actually receiving a printed catalog each quarter is the household cat. Somebody had bought a gift for the family in the past and used the cat's name, and that has now become a resident at that location. While this in particular isn't really a bad customer experience other than they too feel guilty for receiving 4 catalogs, and some people may cancel just as part of that because they don't want all the printed waste, a big hit to the marketing budget. Next, we're going to flip over to another case study from Wine Library. This is an example of where there was a Facebook ad promoting Wine Library and its ability to ship wine to your location. Many of you might be interested in this as I'm talking through it. As were we. One of my friends went through and started to click on the Wine Library experience. They went to the Wine Library site, started to fill out a purchase. They selected 12 wines in which they wanted to have shipped to their location, to which they found out that their residential address did not support deliveries of wine. Wine Library did a good job here of trying to sell them oils or vinegars as an alternative for things that they could ship to their location. But they were not able to receive wine. That in and of itself is okay, maybe explainable. But then Wine Library shows us the disconnected channels. After that experience, they proceeded to send daily messages to this person, trying to entice them to order wine from Wine Library. This continued for 30-plus days. In part, it was of this person to actually go and unsubscribe to some of those emails, but at the same time, as they didn't do that for a few days, they started to find humor in this and looked at other ways to promote this experience and started to use Facebook to share their experience on a day-to-day basis to update their friends and their social network on this poor experience at Wine Library's expense. Here's an example of Wine Library not knowing that this customer's email address was for the person that filled out the order form from a state that they can't deliver to. Had they updated their data, they would have been able to prevent this poor customer experience and the backlash on social media. So while these two experiences are from B2C, B2B organizations, for those of you on the phone, are experiencing the same thing. You have duplicate accounts in your CRMs, and as that happens and you try to attribute activity for the contacts of those accounts, your lead scoring is inaccurate. You're not accurately updating those scores with their activity and giving them an accurate score for follow-up. Additionally, you're routing certain leads for follow-up to sales reps, maybe to the wrong rep, and you end up with conflicts where one rep may be arguing with another about whose account they own. So here's an example in this cartoon. For those of you who are familiar with the kid classic on Where's Waldo, trying to find him amongst a mass of people, this is Where's Waldo acknowledging the same bad customer experience. It's like they have no idea where he is in the customer journey. And this is how many of us feel when we have an existing relationship with a company and they're giving us offers for things that we already have or that we've already declined for one reason or another in the past. So now we're going to transition into how we can start to solve this. For those of you on the phone that are primarily in the business function and pure marketing, this could hopefully give you a framework for things to discuss internally and to probe onto the IT side. For those of you that have started down a data management, data governance process, you'll see some things that you may have started and hopefully can gain a few nuggets of information for things that you can change. For those of you who are embarking, this will give you that framework for you to work through going forward. So we're all striving for having the right data at the right time, in the right form, to the right user. I'm going to talk through each of these things and their impact on the organization. So the right data. This is a focus on gathering the single version of the truth. We want common data model, data cleansing, hygiene. You want good data quality, a common vocabulary, single metadata, and a focus on data lineage. Many of you may not be familiar with data lineage, and that is so that you know internally where your data is coming from, what calculations are performed on it along the way, and where it ultimately is shared. So as we focus on data governance, for those organizations that don't have any form of this today, this grid kind of depicts probably what you feel from a data perspective. Getting at new data sources is probably extremely complex. They're very siloed. Nobody really knows where all the data lives until you find that one subject matter expert for that one particular system. There's very inconsistent data definitions throughout the organization, which leads to a ton of workaround for your marketing teams as you're ultimately trying to engage with the customer. What you're striving to get to next with data governance is where the focus around data is a people, process, and technology piece, centralized to streamline access to all of those systems and all of that data by defining a common vocabulary, creating that single version of the truth, and obtaining high data quality in the organization. So as we flip to data governance starts at the top of this diagram with the discovery, finding out what the data is, what bad data is out there, defining how you're going to change it or how you're going to define that data element. What is the definition of a customer? You're then going to apply those rules and long-term measure and monitor the effectiveness of those rules to the data sets and as new data sets come in. But the most important part to this is who is involved. As business owners, you must own a piece of data governance. You have to work with the IT groups, and it must be shared and collaborative between those two groups to effectively enable a data governance solution. Business will help define what the pain points are, what the new rules will be, what the logic should be, and pass that information over to IT so they can build out those routines to handle it. In addition, there's tools being deployed today that are giving the power to the business to actually apply some of those rules as well as you bridge that gap with IT. Thought we'd point out a few common challenges within data governance projects. A lot of times, if you're involved in the data governance piece, upstream systems, they don't feel like they have any problem. When you're dealing with a transaction application, maybe even a CRM, in and of itself, they don't think that not having the correct state or standardized state value is a problem because maybe it's standardized within their system, but not across the organization. So you have to overcome that hurdle. Another is, from a resourcing perspective, part-time data stewards are sometimes reprioritized to other things. So it is recommended to have a more dedicated resource to a lot of the data steward activity. But we realize that planning for that data steward and their amount of coverage is difficult. It's like production support. You don't know when there's going to be issues. You don't know when there's going to be spikes in effort. And we can help along that line to outline the right resource plan. Automation must continuously streamline the process over time. It's important as you look at defining new rules, while that may start off manual, to put that into automation so that things are corrected and that they are hands-off as you go. And again, that's where that monitoring and alerts come into play. You definitely want to show incremental improvements quickly, quick wins out of the gate for data governance, and I'll show you some as we go in this presentation. And lastly, again, business and IT must continue to work together. The next stage is at the right time. And you work with your IT departments. They'll define a lot of this structure. So I'm not going to go through the terms on the right-hand side here about whether it's an extract, transform, and load, or extract, load, and transform, or warehouse, data lake, or whether you're using the Marketo Engagement Hub as your centralized repository. But what I want to point out from a data integration perspective is, as business users, you can influence this as well. You can perform a self-assessment, similar to the diagram on the left here, by just saying, how are our customers interacting with us? Which channels are they communicating with us through? Whether it's through the contact center, service center, email, mobile app, website, etc. And how is that data making its way back into our sales, service, and marketing repositories? Or is it? And how is it being shared across sales, service, and marketing? And as you start to identify those gaps, those are opportunities for you to work with IT or even within your own organization to build new processes in place to better support the cross-channel experience. As an output from that, you should work internally or strive to have a current state architecture diagram. You should know your data ecosystem. Something like this, where you've probably seen many variations of this, but working from left to right, you just map out what sources are out in your environment, how that data is flowing through, and ultimately is getting used at the customer engagement channels. The more systems that you have, we realize there's definitely more complexity involved in setting them up and getting data from them, but there's also more opportunity. There could be one or two data elements from one of your sources that would be really valuable into analytics and influence your customer experience. The next stage is in the right form, data management. How do you maintain that data? How is it being visualized? Through reports, analytics, and through reference data management. Here's an example of reference data management. It's a really basic one. And this is define the states across your organization, the US states. A lot of organizations will have, each system will do it a different way. There's a lot of misspellings of states throughout the organization, but these are things that you can easily set up as a standard list and put rules in place that are fully automated to correct misspellings and others. Plus, it gives you the opportunity to address questions like, how are we going to handle the US Virgin Islands? How are we going to handle Puerto Rico? We've seen organizations that want to expand the list of a certain thing that's not as natural, but as long as it's commonly agreed upon within the organization, that may be fine. But the point there is that it's commonly agreed upon through the data governance process, whether you're going to include Puerto Rico as a US state or not, and what the abbreviation is. Lastly is by the right user. And these are things for you to be aware of. As data hits into your system, what are those accessibility and the permissions and what users can access information? Most of the obligation here goes back onto the IT side for regulatory compliance, privacy protection, information security, and making sure that you're retaining data for the right and proper amount of time. Those are things for you to be aware of that need to exist, be defined, but the IT side, ultimately you can work with them to deploy them. So as you look at the data governance process, it can be a little daunting and seem like there's a lot involved. In some cases, that is true. The data governance process is exactly that. It's a process that needs to evolve over typically a few years until you're fully operational and have a ton of momentum on the data governance side. But that doesn't mean you can't have quick wins within the first 6 months. You can definitely deploy some workarounds on your side to appropriately address the data quality that is shown within your customer engagement platform. And just to remind everybody at this stage in the webinar, if you're thinking this data governance process is larger than expected and why we're doing it, remember back to Adrian's words at the beginning. We want to have a highly targeted, highly engaged economy at this point where we're personalizing our messaging to people. And as soon as you do that personalization, you are at risk of showing your customer your dirty data. If it's as simple as their first name, it could be misspelled. It could be the wrong first name. If you start to get into products, all of that personalization leads to showing the customer your dirty data. Worse yet, if you're avoiding the personalization opportunities that are out there, you're missing out on a huge opportunity at this point. Customers are looking for that engagement and looking for that personalization to continue their journey with you. So now let's transition into a more tactical approach of where to go next and how to get started. So where do you begin? First and foremost, you want to assess and prioritize the data that is most important to you and for the things you're doing today. Not the things necessarily that you want to do well down the road, but you want to look at the things that you are doing today and which is impacting your customer experiences now. That gives you those quick wins. So do not try to boil the ocean. As you begin that, it's starting through, from left to right on this slide, profiling. Take a look at your data. If you deal with work order types, profile them. See how many different types are out there. If you deal with industry types or industry codes, look at how many different values are out there. Profile the employee or number of employee field and see how many records are actually filled in. Are there accurate ranges, or is it just a solid number? Profile your data sets to figure out where the problems really are. Let the data tell you that story as opposed to guessing. Next, transition that outcome from profiling into normalization, standardization. In this case, it's the title field. We have VP, Vice President, all of that different information that you want to standardize. And maybe across the board, you can create a rule that is just Vice President. Deduplication is then that next stage. So looking back at our LL Bean example, how can that be addressed? Could we, at a minimum, set a primary resident at each location so that we don't send out multiple? And then come up with the rules associated with that primary. Maybe it's the person with the most transactions, the highest spend, the most recent transaction. Different things for you to define, but there's an answer in that deduplication that can help, one, save marketing budgets, and two, improve the customer experience. And as you get through that standard cleanse database and dedupe data set, you can look to enrich your data with demographic, firmographic, and behavioral data. As I mentioned earlier, all of that should feed into the bottom here of automating those processes, monitoring and improving it. As you get started on those, there's typically a question about internally, how do you get the support for a data governance organization? I'm going to outline both a top-down and bottom-up approach. Top-down is getting that experience or that support from an executive and having that mandated down. That is very, very rare, extremely effective, but very rare in organizations. Typically, you need to show results. And that's where we'll lean to the more common, which is the bottom-up. And that is just get started with some of those things that we've shown on the past couple slides. Get started within your system, within the engagement platform, and have that cascade back into CRM and some other applications to where you really are identifying and illustrating the problem and the benefits that can come from it. Here are a few quick hit, inexpensive improvements that you can do now. On the right-hand side, I have a screenshot of a Marketo Smart List. You can use that tool, that capability, if using Marketo, to do a lot of the things on the left. You can run health check queries that I talked about that start the process of data profiling. You can fix bad emails. You can change industry names to certain standards. You can change that title, Vice President, and make that a standard. You can make sure that you have a standard use of the state codes, maybe even create a lookup for states and zip codes to make sure that you have an accurate combination of those two things on all the fields. If somebody provides a zip code but not a state, you can update that state based on the zip code. There are many lookups out there that are available for that type of thing. Small, quick wins. Also, phone number detection. Does it have the right number of digits? Does it have other miscellaneous characters out there? So you can read from the full list, but those are things for quick and inexpensive improvement. Next, things to consider or inquire about as you're embarking on this, or maybe even just to fact find to see, has anybody else in the organization started down this path? Check around. Do you have an existing ETL tool that your organization is using? Do they do any data quality today? Typically, the answer is going to be yes. You may just not be familiar with it. The reason you care is that you can leverage that tool to help aid in some of your standardization, data cleansing, and deduping. Check around with some of the other systems and find out who might be doing any form of data governance. See what processes or roadblocks they've encountered in the past. Have you built internally a centralized data warehouse or a data mart? If you have, the people that worked on that saw the bad data. They thought about fixing it. Hopefully they did, and hopefully you've started down that process, but if not, it's giving you that opportunity to inquire with them and gain from those lessons learned. What data standards is your marketing team already applying? You may not be aware, but the folks that are creating the campaigns on a day in, day out basis and creating those lists, they're already doing some of these workarounds. They're seeing these problems. They may not be capturing all of them, and that's the biggest problem, but they're trying their best to make the data sets that are going out clean. And it's gaining, again, some of that visibility to those lessons learned that will help you as you expand that data governance and data quality program. And lastly, just how well is your marketing automation platform integrated with sales and service? So going back to that diagram, as you do your self-assessment, how well is it feeding to and from those systems so that you can have an integrated platform? As you do those things and you begin down that process, as you establish your data governance framework and data quality, ultimately you begin to achieve an integrated marketing, sales, and service organization. This illustration is just that process map across the different key areas to show where the intersections are amongst them. And as you start to put in improvements to your data quality issues at different areas, you will enable that integrated organization and break down those barriers of your customer silo and those disconnected customers. And with that, Adrian, I'll turn it back to you to wrap up.
Thanks, Tim. So, as we've said today, everything Tim said is super helpful in terms of thinking about your customer engagement strategy. You can have the best strategy in the world, and if you're exposing bad data, you're undermining things at the very beginning. So we've been talking at Marketo about the best ways to engage customers in this engagement economy where expectations are high for both the buyer and the business. And we come up with what we think is a pretty simple formula for doing that, which is be sure you're listening to your customers, learning what they care about, and then engage them with personalized messages. And 3 of the practical ways to get started doing this about our listening, learning, and engaging is to start by having a single source of truth. Right? That's all about the data again. It's about keeping it clean, but it's about having it all in a single place. And it's so that it's usable and you can really learn what your customers want and then build personalized stories about your brand and your products or services. So I won't go into the details of this diagram, but to give you an idea of what it looks like, and Tim showed another example of this, to build your marketing stack around a centralized hub, you're gathering data from all over the place, and so make sure you're bringing it back to a single place where you can use that data. Now we know data can be overwhelming, and data silos make it even worse. But when you centralize a single point of truth that's taking in data from every customer source across your customer database, it creates a foundation for exploration rather than an exercise of one-off reporting. So let me show you an example of what that looks like in the real world. I know these are some tiny little fonts, but these are actual MarTech stacks that are visually represented from 2 of our best customers, Microsoft and Alacadia. So once you have everything coming into that centralized hub, you can really start to understand your customers. You can get that 360-degree view of what they care about and how they want to hear from you. So just to kind of go back to some of the examples that Tim shared as well, just because I bought something for my elderly mother from a brand does not mean that I want to become part of that demographic in the database, right? So listen, pay attention to my behaviors, and what you'll see that I'm someone who lives in a different state, who would have a different climate, implying different clothes and so forth, and I have quite different interests than my elderly mother. So again, pay attention, clean up the data, and at that point you can start to build personalized stories. Do something with the data you've collected and you've cleaned up. So here's a quick story that I love about a company, one of the Marketo customers that's doing this really well. I love this story because I am a dog owner. I have a yellow lab who is now 15 years old, but I've had her since she was a puppy. So the American Kennel Club, I'm sure most of you are familiar with them, has figured out that the best time to engage a dog owner is when they've just gotten a new puppy. I got a puppy. Unless you've had lots and lots and lots of puppies, you generally have questions, right? And that maybe seems a bit obvious, but it doesn't stop there, right? They're not bombarding me with generic AKC messages just because I bought a puppy. They're understanding that I bought a lab, and they understand the life stages of a lab as they go, especially through that first year. It's changing rather quickly. And the cadence of how a lab matures may be different than how a whippet or some other kind of breed actually matures. So what they're doing is they're sending very specific information about that breed to that owner at precisely the right time in that puppy's development. So the point is, their content is relevant. Hey, I got a puppy. That's what I need information. It's personal. It's about my breed, and it's timely. It's about, they're giving me information about puppy shots at exactly the point when I should be thinking about puppy shots, or puppy socializing at the point when I need to do that, or switching up the dog food at right when I need to do that. So it's exactly what I'm trying to do and answering the questions that are in my mind at that moment in time. So that's the kind of customer engagement you can only get when you have the right tools in place. An engagement platform like Marketo enables you to collect the right data, set up sophisticated segmentation, and nurture and react to your customers' behavior. That's the most important part, in real time and at scale, right? It's one thing to do this across a dozen customers. It's another thing to do it across 1 million. So with that, I want to thank Tim for joining us and providing other truly practical information today, and we're going to wrap up and take a few questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Adrienne and Tim. That was super helpful. I know the topic of data management is daunting, but this really helped understand that there is a process to help fix it. So that was great. So we do have a few questions I'd love to get answered. Our first one is from Brooke. She's asking, how do companies typically staff a data governance organization? How many people, I think, would be a good follow-up question to that, do you need to tackle this kind of project?
That's a great question, Brooke. It does vary quite a bit depending on your organization, the size of your company, and if you're dealing in just the U.S. or globally. As a general rule of thumb, you can start off small, especially as I talked about the bottom-up approach. You can start with a small group. I did point out the risks associated with a part-time resource towards data stewardship. The risks there is that person, as they become less active in data stewardship, they will get pulled off someplace else. So it does often help to allocate someone, and in a lot of cases it is a single person to start, that is focused on data stewardship, data governance, working with IT to share those findings, the rules, and the logic that now needs to be applied to the data. So it does depend on your organization side. We can definitely talk separately through that. But generally speaking, a single individual is a great place to start. Get started, have that person show some results, gain the momentum to expand within the organization.
Great. Thank you, Tim. Our next one is from Dave. He's wondering, how does the data management framework you've outlined help companies prepare for GDPR?
Fantastic question, especially you must be from a global organization that has a European presence. And for those of you listening, if you're not familiar with GDPR, please start Google searching, start getting familiar with it. It is coming May of 2018 to the US. It is essentially a global data protection regulation that's out there to make sure that you're abstracting your customer information appropriately. And the data management framework that we talked through puts you in a good position to react to the GDPR regulation. At the end of the day, GDPR, you're going to need to know where your data is across the ecosystem. So if you just even have that current state diagram mapped out, that's a big help. If you have a technology that supports data lineage, that's a huge jump forward, because then you can see where maybe a certain data value is in your organization where you had no idea. Think about a specific field that's in a CRM system that now has propagated its way into a data warehouse, a data lake, into certain reports, and maybe then a specific business unit data mart. There's really no way to know that that field was or is propagated as such without a data lineage technology that's out there. So coupling the framework that I mentioned as well as the certain technologies that are out there, you can best position yourself to react to GDPR regulation.
Great, thank you. And we have time for just one more question. If we don't get to your questions, we'll try and follow up with you afterwards. But our last one is from Rick. He's asking, marketers typically receive most of the data they use rather than generate it through data entry. How does that impact the marketing org sphere of influence on data governance?
I'll take that one as well. That's a great question, because as marketing organizations, a lot of times you're hesitant to see where your sphere of influence is down into IT or maybe some of the other areas, especially in a topic around data. Yes, you're consumers of the data, and ultimately your customers are massively impacted by that. But where that sphere of influence back to changing it, sometimes there is hesitation. But that is exactly it. As marketing or marketers that are focused on customer engagement, you're seeing the direct impact. You're seeing the return on investment that you can have from having better data quality, and have a huge stake in setting those rules and making sure that the data is of quality. For a while, data governance, data quality was purely an IT thing. And what we're seeing is that shift is going much more into, over the past 5 years, where it's a shared thing, and going beyond that to more and more of a business side issue. So look to your sales counterparts, your service counterparts, gather that information about bad data, start deploying those workarounds and those cleansing routines that we talked about here, and then building that influence and momentum internally to make this an enterprise-wide mission for data governance, data quality.
Great. Well, thank you so much again. Thank you, Tim and Adrian, for your time today. Thank you to everyone who participated in this webinar. Hopefully you're able to get some wonderful takeaways to start tackling your data issues. And with that, have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.